Hi, let's talk about water. Many of my observations have been formed just walking along the ocean, just observing and thinking about things. And today I just want to speak to you about maybe some aspects that we don't often think about. We take it for granted. When you walk along the ocean's edge, you think, for all these years, for as long as we know, people have been building on that water edge. Houses, buildings, hotels, and pretty much they can depend on those water levels remaining constant. Now we know now and then there are fluctuations in the tides, there are storms, even now and then there might be a tsunami. But for the most part, the water line, its boundaries, are established and stable, so much so that we can build our houses there. We can invest in the future knowing that that line will remain constant. Only a few fluctuations with tides, but why does that remain so constant? Water is H2O, hydrogen, two atoms of hydrogen combined with one atom of oxygen. Hydrogen is the most abundant chemical substance in the universe by far. And then oxygen, after helium, oxygen is the third most abundant substance in the universe. So here we have hydrogen and oxygen, the most abundant elements in the earth, and yet the water levels remain constant. There's not more water being formed randomly, sporadically. There should just be, by our thinking, if there's just oxygen and hydrogen coming together, there should just be water forming all the time. Randomly, at any given moment, water should just increase and flood all of the earth. Now, why doesn't that happen? Why doesn't the water just cover the earth? We've seen a lot in recent years. Climate activists, for instance, have, for various reasons, and I want to say many of those reasons are political and for financial gain. People take up various positions and promote certain agendas, and climate change is one of them. It's very much a political and a financial gain agenda. But there are climate change activists that say, for instance, fearing that the earth caps will melt. The ice is melting all over the earth, there's global warming, and they put the fear in people's hearts to, of course, comply with their agendas, to say that, well, the earth is going to be flooded. We're just going to be overtaken by water. Well, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen for a few reasons, but even if you have a whole bucket full of ice and leave all that ice to melt, the bucket doesn't overflow. The water level remains constant. But we know, and we'll look at the scripture in a moment, that God promised that He will never flood the earth with water again. But have you ever thought about these things? Have you ever thought about why and how this balance is kept so perfectly? Have you ever thought about the balance between the water and the land, and how God maintains that balance in the earth and even in our bodies. So let's look at a couple of scriptures just to start off with, and let's talk about this a little bit. Today is not going to be a big theological teaching. I just want to provoke you to get a perspective and see how in control your Father is. So Genesis 1 verse 9 and 10 says, "And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered into one place, so that dry land may appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good." Now let's look at what happens when the flood came and a promise God made concerning that. Genesis 7, it says from verse 11, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth." That literally means they were cleft open so as to burst forth. "And the floodgates of the heavens were opened. And the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Then in Genesis 9 verse 14 and 15, "Whenever I form clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life." So here we see a picture. The unrighteousness of man causes God to say, "I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to judge it." And then there was Noah, who was righteous in God's sight. He appealed to God, and because of Noah, God said, "I will preserve you from the judgment." What is the judgment? The judgment is water that floods the earth. So if water represents Christ, if he is the water, and the land represents mankind, it represents the standard of man, the unrighteousness and the unrighteous works of man. Much as in our body, it's represented, most of our body is water. Most of our body, most of our being should be identified as spirit. But there is a part of us that is controlled by the works of the flesh, or our humanness. So here we see a picture where God's righteousness judges and floods, covers the unrighteousness of man. And it is depicted by water flooding the earth. And once this judgment has taken place with water, I want you to see the word is what judges unrighteousness. The righteous standard of the word, the righteous standard of Christ, is what judges unrighteousness. You don't have to proclaim judgment as a person. The righteous standard of Christ will bring judgment to all works of unrighteousness. But once God did that, he made a promise and he made a covenant. And that covenant was made with a sign of a rainbow. We've spoken about this before, but a rainbow is actually a circle. It's not just a bow. If you look at it from outside the atmosphere, or even from a plane, you look at it at a certain angle, you will see that it is a circle. And circles are used to depict covenants. God makes a covenant with man. And how he makes that covenant and what a rainbow is in fact particles of light that pass through water. Light passes through, not particles of light, it's light rays that passes through particles of water. We see this combination. This covenant that God makes in a circle that's called a rainbow is in fact light, which is his illumination, his truth that passes through the word. And the word diffracts and breaks up the illumination of truth in such a way that this rainbow is formed. And that is the sign. God says, that's the sign that I will never again flood the earth. I will never again use water, physical water, to judge the unrighteousness of man. But we know that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will cover the earth as waters cover the sea. In fact, there will be a judgment, but it will not be physical water. It will be the Word of God, and it will be the illumination of His truth that will judge unrighteousness at the end. Now, it's funny, as I walk around, even here in America, many houses have flagpoles, and most patriotic people will have the American flag on it, and then there are some that have this LGBTQ agenda and promote that in their lifestyle and sometimes even promote it forcefully on others. But they will do it with a rainbow flag. Unfortunately, their rainbow has only got 6 colors, and we know 6 is the number of man. So in their own strength, in their own wisdom, which is foolishness to God, they think that the rainbow represents their agenda. But it's only 6 colors. It's not the fullness. The fullness is 7. And we know that the rainbow is a spectrum, right? It's actually a spectrum of many colors. But you see clearly the 7 colors in the rainbow that are distinguishable. And that speaks of a completeness, but it also shows the deception of those who have an LGBTQ agenda and want to separate themselves from the knowledge of God. That brings judgment on themselves. But their time is not yet now for that judgment. That judgment will come when their deception is exposed and they come face to face with the truth. But this light that passes through water particles, the illumination of Christ, is the covenant that God makes with man. And what He's saying is, the righteous standard that is Christ will deal with man's sinful nature. From now on, it will be the righteous standard of Christ that will deal with sinfulness. So let's think about just the balance of water. Why doesn't water just form all over the place where all of the universe is just mostly hydrogen, helium, and oxygen? Why doesn't hydrogen and oxygen just combine with more atoms and just form water everywhere? Why don't the ice caps melt and change the ocean levels? Why, despite all the climate change claims, does the water level remain the same on the earth year after year? Well, simply because God has set the boundaries. Once God has established the boundaries, nothing's going to change that. Nothing man does, no agendas of man, no foolishness, no scientific cleverness is going to change what God has established. Now, water is the most studied thing just about in the earth. People have studied water since the beginning of time. Yet, it remains such a mystery. Did you realize water is such a mystery? For instance, no one knows where water comes from. Now, there are many theories. Some say that it existed as water vapor while the planet was too hot, and then over millions of years as the earth cooled down, that vapor then could precipitate and become water. Others say no, there were like meteorite showers that carried water and brought it to the earth. And there's various different theories and thoughts. The funny thing is, with all of their theories and speculations as to how it must have come about, all their theories include the fact that water then already existed. Where did water come from? And so, of course, they go to the only thing they know when they know nothing else. They say, oh, there was a Big Bang. Well, they say there was a Big Bang because water cannot be formed actually outside of an explosion. This is the interesting thing about water. So in all of man's theories as to where it came about, water already existed. And why does it not just keep forming? Because there's a controlled cycle, and we know of the water cycle. Water exists as not just the liquid, but the vapor, the gas, and the solid. So there's solid, liquid, and gas. And water exists in these three forms, but however it came about, according to scientists, it already existed. Because God said, let there be. And when God put things in place, He also established the boundaries. So this water cycle of water in the oceans being heated by the wind and the sun, then evaporates, and it goes up into the clouds as water vapor, and it remains up there until such time that it rains down on the earth in the form of liquid again. Some of it is frozen on the ice caps and polar caps and such places, and at various times that'll melt, at various times it will freeze. But the existence of this water, in fact, the amount of water that is in the earth doesn't change. Water doesn't disappear, nor is more water created. It remains as constant. It has always been, since God said, let it be. That water has existed in one of those three forms, in the same balance as it has always been. That balance is actually reflected perfectly in our bodies. No matter how much your DNA might change. Some people develop in their families blonde hair and blue eyes, and others develop brown hair, and some Irish people even have a lot of ginger heads and whatever. DNA might change. But what's never changed in our bodies since God created man is that we are mostly 70% water. So the water has existed in our bodies in the same balance as it exists in His creation, in the earth. And so even though water is the most studied compound in history, it's still a mystery. They don't know where it comes from. For instance, hydrogen is highly explosive. Hydrogen bomb created so much chaos. And you can do your research on the chaos and destruction of the explosion of a hydrogen bomb. Oxygen, on the other hand, is an element that supports combustion. Imagine, the one element is so combustible and so explosive, the other element supports combustion, yet we use water, the combination of the two of them, the way God created it. We use water to put out fires. When it is in balance, when it represents the truth of who Christ is. Remember, Christ doesn't represent, he's not a type. Christ is not a type of water, of what water is. Water represents who Christ is. He is first, we spoke about this in the previous session, and because He is, He creates water to give us a picture, to give us an understanding a little bit about who Christ is. And so we see the elements of this which is potentially so explosive and so combustible, yet that is what is the primary element used to extinguish fires. But water cannot be created because it takes a massive explosion to create water. The combining of these atoms, two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, needs such a force, an explosive force, that even if they do recreate it, scientists, they can't create it cleanly, that there's no contamination of other explosive elements, and so the water that's formed is not even usable for drinking water. So even in all our cleverness, we still have not figured out how to make more water in any way that's feasible or that can change the balance of water that God already predestined and determined when He said, "Let there be." Isn't that incredible? Have you ever thought of these balances that are so under God's control? Now, I want to start closing off just looking at a couple of scriptures, and there are many more. But I want you to see what Scripture says about this, and then you realize God has always said that He is in control, that He has set the boundaries, that He holds the balance. It's just man that tries to be so clever and so full of himself that he ignores that which God has already said. I am the truth. Well, let's look at Proverbs 8, and we'll look from verse 23 to verse 29. This is wisdom speaking in this chapter. So wisdom is declaring that from everlasting wisdom, was established from the beginning. Before the earth began, when there were no watery depths, I was brought forth. When no springs were overflowing with water. You see, God is before these things. Before watery depths, before springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth, before He made the land or fields or any of the dust of the earth. Who made it? He made it. I was there when He established the heavens, when He is inscribed a circle on the face of the deep. That word circle can be used for horizon, but can also be used for a vault. It's almost as if that which is contained by God in the deep, He inscribed that on the face of the deep. He is the full reservoir of all of these things which is about to come about. Verse 28, when he established the clouds above, when the fountains of the deep gushed forth. Verse 29, and this is our theme for today. When he set a boundary for the sea, so that the waters would not surpass his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth. Wisdom says, I was there. God was there, but he did these things. He set the boundary for the sea, so the waters would not surpass his command. I love that. That is, we can be at such peace. We can so be at rest, knowing our Father is in control. He spoke from the beginning, and he will have the last word. And everything that scientists and these fear-mongers want to inflict on the world has no effect on us. We will not be swayed. We will not come under their fear and under their influence. We will be at peace because our Father set the boundary. He commanded it, and it cannot surpass that. He marked the foundations. Let's look at Job 26 verse 10. It says, he inscribed a horizon on the face of the waters. Another way of saying that is he prescribed the limit of the waters. On the face of the waters, at the boundary between light and darkness. Isn't that incredible? I love how Job puts it. And you can read this whole Psalm 104, but let's just look at 2 verses of it. The whole of Psalm 104 gives you such a clear picture of this. But verse 5 and 6 says, he set the earth on its foundations, never to be moved. You covered it with the deep like a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. It's actually a picture of the waters being like a garment of the deep. So when we go back to Genesis 1, the Spirit hovered over the face of the waters, and the deep existed, the deep as God, and the waters, as we said, is Christ putting on display who God is. Here it says the waters are like a garment of the deep. It's a beautiful picture. The waters are like a garment of the deep that then set its boundaries by covering certain of the mountains. And then it says, at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, they hurried away. Isn't it clear for us that the most common element on the earth and the most common element in our bodies it's taken for granted, but it is such a mystery in that no one knows where it came from. No one knows how it was formed. No one knows how this perfect balance is always maintained. Scientists will come up with a lot of theories to try and understand it, but they cannot explain it other than what God already told us. He said, He established, He set the boundaries. He keeps the boundaries in the earth in perfect balance, just as He keeps your life in perfect balance. All of this, the waters on the earth and the water in our body, comes from the deep, just as Christ reveals the Father. He is the one who establishes what righteousness is. And when we live and walk in His truth, when we abide in Him, in His righteous ways, our lives will always be kept in perfect balance. He keeps in perfect rest those whose minds are set on Him. When we are set on His righteous ways and we allow Him to have His ways in our life. Just as He controls the borders and the boundaries of water, the earth, and in our physical bodies, He will also establish a perfect balance in all of our lives. And He'll hold this balance until His purpose is fulfilled. In the earth, the waters will not flood the earth. The ice caps will not melt and flood the earth. There will always be a perfect balance of water in the earth until God's purpose in the earth has been fulfilled. Just like in our physical bodies, that 70% water balance will always be there until our earthly bodies have no more purpose and God has accomplished what He wants through man in His physical form. And then heaven and earth will pass away. But He will accomplish what He set out to accomplish in the earth. Don't be fearful about what's happening around you, what's happening in the earth around you. Don't be fearful of the cleverness of man trying to intimidate us with all their arguments and all their wise talk, when they don't even know the mystery of the most abundant element in the earth. They don't even know where it comes from. They don't know how to make it. They don't know how to replicate it. They can try and replicate clone cells and do all those things, but they can't even replicate water to the place that we can drink it and we don't need the balance that God has set in place. So here is an encouragement to you. God, your Father, established the balance in the earth. He established the balance in your body. And part of what this shows is that even though 30% of your body is not water, it is then of dust. Because of dust we were made, and to dust we will return. That dust is the parts that are not water. Once you turn to dust, those cells are dead. There's no more water eventually in them. And that represents where you come from. But the water really represents the life that comes from Christ. And the most of our life, the most of our identity should really be your spirit condition. You should be much more focused on the condition of your spirit man than on the flesh and the desires of the flesh and the needs of the flesh. Yes, there's wisdom in taking care of your body, but your body includes the 70% water. But it's a reminder for you that actually it is Christ who holds us together. He is the preeminent one, and we should be much more focused on the truth of the Spirit, the source from which we come, out of the deep, our Father, than we are about just these temporary things that will pass away. The waters will not pass away. Physical water, yes, but not the waters that come from the deep. Christ and those who are in Him will remain. And we'll see as we go on in further sessions, we'll talk about it. We've spoken about it even in the earlier sessions. It becomes this river of water of life that flows from His throne. We can trust in God. We can trust that He's in control. We can be at peace in Him. And we can focus on allowing Him to be the preeminent one, who holds all things in the balance, who commands all things, and who will bring about that which He began. Don't put your trust in man. You can depend on your Father, who is the blessed controller of all things. To those who love Him, we will see this accomplished in Christ. God bless you.